GreedFall. There's a very specific type of itch only a classic 2010-style BioWare RPG can scratch, and the developers somehow captured that exact formula. The entire premise revolves around a magical island where diplomacy often hits harder than a sword. It has some undeniable jank, mostly in facial animations and slightly stiff movement, but the faction politics run incredibly deep. Double-crossing an entire nation just to keep a companion happy is a regular Tuesday. Considering there's easily 40 hours of rich, consequence-heavy storytelling packed in here, a 90% discount dropping it to just $3.49 makes grabbing it practically mandatory. Vampyr. Playing a doctor who recently turned into a vampire creates a deeply uncomfortable moral system. Curing sick citizens in 1918 London gives them better blood quality, meaning if you keep everyone healthy, eating them grants massive experience points. The combat can feel a little clunky when dealing with large crowds, but the narrative weight carries the whole experience. Deciding whether to doom a neighborhood to plague just so you can level up enough to beat a boss is genuinely stressful. Dropping 90% to roughly $4 is a ridiculously low entry fee for an atmosphere this thick. The Surge. Most Souls-likes just have you farm enemies hoping a specific piece of armor drops. Here, if you want a guy's helmet, you have to physically target his head during combat and violently rip it off. It turns every single fight into a calculated surgical strike. The industrial sci-fi setting is a brutal change of pace from medieval castles, and the factory environments are absolute mazes. Picking up a punishing metallic action RPG for $1.94 is basically theft. The amount of visceral satisfaction from building an entire suit of armor from spare enemy parts never gets old. The Surge 2. Taking everything the first game did right and injecting it with adrenaline resulted in one of the tightest combat systems in the genre. The directional parry mechanic demands intense precision, but pulling it off makes you feel like an unstoppable cyborg ninja. The level design opens up significantly, offering bizarre vertical shortcuts and vastly improved boss encounters. Players easily dump 30 to 40 hours into mastering the aggressive deflect systems alone. For a mere $2.99 at 90% off, the sheer density of weapons, implants, and brutal executions makes this an absolute cornerstone of any action fan's library. Iratus, Lord of the Dead. Flipping the Darkest Dungeon formula completely backwards, the goal here is violently dismantle groups of heroic adventurers. Using their leftover parts, the Necromancer builds an army of vampires, skeletons, and banshees, driving the enemy heroes completely insane with stress mechanics so they turn on each other is incredibly satisfying. The difficulty curve hits like a freight train early on, punishing sloppy resource management. But building a customized squad of undead horrors for under $3 offers immense strategic depth for anyone who secretly roots for the villain. Othercide. The visual style instantly grabs your attention with harsh monochrome art bleeding with bright red accents. Combat relies heavily on timeline manipulation, forcing players to interrupt enemy attacks before they even happen. Healing a damaged unit requires permanently sacrificing another daughter of the same level, meaning every single mistake hurts on a psychological level. It's a gorgeous, depressing, and deeply demanding tactical experience. Seeing a game with this much style and tactical rigor sitting at $2.99 is wild, especially considering how many hours can be lost just trying to survive one more boss phase. My time at Portia. Farming simulators usually focus on crops, but building industrial machinery out of the ruins of civilization brings a totally different energy to the genre. Gathering materials, fighting weird monsters in abandoned ruins, and undercutting rival builders to become the town's favorite mechanic is wildly addicting. The voice acting can be incredibly hit or miss, and the early grind feels slow. Yet players routinely look at the clock and realize they've spent 80 hours assembling water wheels and chatting up townsfolk. Snagging 80% off for $5.99 secures dozens of cozy industrial obsession. Call of Cthulhu. Solving a grim murder mystery requires a sharp mind, but finding too many clues here actively destroys the detective's sanity. Upgrading the investigation skills unlocks new dialogue options, but reading forbidden books alters the character's perception of reality. Leaning completely into the madness might be the only way to understand the cultists, even if it leads to a terrible fate. The stealth sections are undeniably rough around the edges, but the cosmic dread is executed flawlessly. At $2.99, an 85% discount makes this bizarre psychological descent totally irresistible for a rainy weekend. Born of Bread. Taking heavy inspiration from the classic Paper Mario formula, the charm here is absolutely infectious. The turn-based battles require timed button presses to maximize damage or defend against attacks, keeping the pacing active rather than passive. Exploring the 2.5D world involves using weird companion abilities to solve environmental puzzles. The humor is surprisingly sharp, frequently poking fun at standard RPG tropes. For anyone who grew up loving Nintendo's paper-thin RPGs, paying $3.74 for this much colorful, light-hearted nostalgia feels like finding money in an old winter coat. Hellslave. Embracing a hardcore, old-school dungeon-crawling aesthetic, the grim art style alone sets a miserable, oppressive tone. Swearing allegiance to a demon just to get enough power to fight an impending apocalypse creates a fantastic tension in character building. The passive skill trees are dense, allowing for deeply broken synergies if the math is calculated correctly. The interface can be slightly overwhelming at first glance, but the combat loop is deeply rewarding. Grabbing an 85% discount to get this for $2.99 provides a terrifying amount of grim dark spreadsheet optimization. Noob the Factionless. Capturing the exact feeling of playing a deeply flawed MMORPG with a group of friends who don't know what they are doing. The entire experience mocks online gaming culture, complete with useless guildmates, toxic players, and ridiculous fetch quests. The combat stays firmly rooted in traditional turn-based mechanics, while the narrative handles the comedy. Dropping down to $28.18 with a 46% discount represents a steeper price than others on the list. But the incredibly niche humor accurately nails the nostalgia of early 2000s online gaming lobbies. Anima Gate of Memories. Based on a notoriously complex tabletop RPG, the lore runs incredibly deep for those willing to read. The dual character mechanic allows fluid swapping during fast-paced hack-and-slash combat, extending combos in very creative ways. The platforming sections can feel incredibly frustrating due to some awkward camera angles, and the voice acting certainly shows its indie budget. Still, the boss fights offer intense bullet hell-inspired challenges that require serious reflexes. At a 65% discount for $6.99, the sheer ambition of the narrative and combat systems makes ignoring the rough patches easy. Souldiers. Packing some of the most gorgeous 16-bit pixel art of the modern era, the visual environments demand your attention immediately. Choosing between 3 distinct classes radically changes the entire approach to combat and exploration in this massive Metroidvania. The difficulty is unapologetically brutal, often requiring flawless execution just to survive basic enemy encounters. Some players find the checkpoint spacing a bit too punishing. However, getting an 85% cut down to $2.99 offers a gorgeous, massive world for masochists who want their platforming skills pushed to the absolute breaking point. Inquisitor, a massive text-heavy throwback to the absolute earliest days of CRPGs. The detective work involves gathering evidence, interrogating suspects, and occasionally employing horrific medieval torture to extract confessions. The combat is incredibly dated and frequently tedious, often feeling like a chore between the fascinating investigation segments. It requires immense patience and a love for reading novels worth of dark fantasy dialogue. Hitting a 2-year low at $2.49 makes this the perfect time to grab a brutally uncompromising classic that treats the player with zero handholding. Gladiator Guild Manager. Operating from the sidelines, the core loop is all about drafting weird combinations of units and manipulating market prices. Watching a fully leveled Cryomancer freeze an enemy tank while a Berserker chops them to pieces is deeply satisfying. The auto-battler mechanics are easy to grasp, but surviving the higher arenas requires carefully managing guild reputation and daily resources. It's the exact kind of game that causes people to stay up until 3 a.m. tweaking unit placement by a single grid square. For under $5, the strategic addiction hits incredibly hard.
Iron Danger. Every combat encounter operates on a timeline divided into half-second heartbeats. If a fire blast kills a character, simply rewinding time a few seconds allows for a perfectly timed block or a sidestep. It turns every chaotic ambush into an elaborate puzzle of trial and error. The campaign is relatively short compared to massive epics, but the time manipulation never wears out its welcome. Dropping an incredible 90% to $1.99, it provides an utterly unique tactical approach that feels completely different from anything else in the genre. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Stormground. Bringing the tabletop miniature experience to a digital hex grid, the tactical positioning is incredibly punishing. Unit customization allows for a massive variety of loadouts, letting players build heavily specialized warbands across 3 distinct factions. The roguelike campaign structure means every defeat wipes away progress, which can feel deeply frustrating when bad RNG strikes. However, the visual weight of the units and the dark fantasy atmosphere are spot on. At a 90% discount for $1.99, the amount of tactical depth and grim-dark strategy available is absurdly generous. Vernal Edge. Fusing the exploration of a Metroidvania with the insanely high execution combo system of games like Devil May Cry, launching enemies into the air and keeping them suspended with perfectly timed strikes feels incredible once the muscle memory clicks. The world map is completely open from the start, letting players tackle islands and bosses in whatever order they choose. Navigating the overworld in the airship can feel slightly tedious, but the combat engine is a masterpiece of indie design. Getting an 85% discount for $2.54 makes this high-speed brawler a brilliant pickup. Naheulbeuk's Dungeon Master. Taking command of a terrible, disorganized dungeon and trying to make it profitable is a hilarious twist on management sims. Hiring incompetent goblins, building evil traps, and fending off annoying heroic adventurers requires a surprising amount of economic balancing. Watching highly trained elves slip on cheap Thavern floorings while the treasury slowly fills up is oddly satisfying. The pacing can drag during the mid-game expansion phase. Still, snagging a 60% discount for $9.99 secures an incredibly charming evil management simulator that constantly refuses to take itself seriously. Curse of the Dead Gods. Greed is the actual enemy in this brutal roguelite. Buying upgrades with gold is safe, but paying with blood permanently increases a corruption meter that fundamentally alters the rules of the run. A full corruption meter might make enemies explode or constantly drain health, forcing chaotic, on-the-fly strategy changes. The light and dark mechanics require keeping torches lit to avoid taking massive bonus damage. Snapping this up for $3.99 at an 80% discount secures hundreds of intense runs where trying to grab just one more chest usually leads to spectacular failure.